So I wanted to come in today and talk about something that's been on my mind as this war in Iran spirals out of control. And it's this idea of control and complexity. This idea that if you want to fool a population of people, then you try to present this problem as very complex. That this war in Iran, between Israel and Iran, United States involvement, it's very complex. When in actuality, it's very, very simple. And what we are seeing right now is a controlled collapse, and it's already here. And we need to talk about where we are right now, because people are going about their business, going to grocery stores, trying to take care of their families, trying to get the kids off to school, trying to just pay the bills, trying to live what feels like a normal life. But then something big is already happening. Something big is already here. That collapse is already here. We are watching this collapse unfolding right before our eyes. You know, you can see it in small ways, right? At the gas station. Sure, now you're paying twice as much for gas. I just filled up a tank today and I couldn't believe it. I was like, how did this happen in just a few weeks? That's what happens when you go along with Israel's war and bomb a country and an entire strait is now closed. That's what happens. All of this, though, this collapse was not random. It was prepared for. It was anticipated. It was gamed out. Maybe not every detail in one giant master document, but the direction of all of this is obvious. Every crisis seems to push in the same direction, right? Less independence. After 9/11, what do we get? The Patriot Act. More fear is created, more dependence on the government, these institutions, these globalists, more centralization, more control. So we'll get to the collapse part of the story here in a minute because we are in it. But first, let's talk about this war and where things are going. It's now spiraling out of control. And if you think this is just like another isolated conflict in the Middle East, you're missing the much bigger picture. So as of today, on this Sunday, as I'm recording this war that the United States and Israel launched on the end of February, really, February 28th into March 1st, has already killed thousands of people. It's pushed the global economy into another round of panic. I mean, just look at the markets right now. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important choke points on Earth, has been effectively crippled, totally closed. New reports out this afternoon that nearly all tanker traffic has stopped. Roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply passes, of course, through this narrow stretch of water. We got reports this afternoon of energy disruption, already sent oil to a 4-year high. We now have inflation back. The Fed, of course, not lowering rates. And all indicators are that the Fed is going to increase rates, raise interest rates as this year unfolds and into 2027. Now, President Trump, over the past few hours, has escalated again, issuing a 48-hour ultimatum, saying that Iran must fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz, or the United States will begin obliterating Iranian nuclear power plants and their desalinization plants, and it will start with one of the biggest ones. That's where it's going to start. We look at the pizza index in Washington, D.C. I have friends in the special forces that sent me notes over the past few hours about how the pizza index is off the charts in Washington, D.C. What does that mean? That means related to this 48-hour ultimatum from President Trump that they are working overtime. Thousands of Marines now being deployed into the Middle East, something President Trump said would never happen. And now here we are back in Israel's war. And the whole while, Israel is using this war, of course, to marginalize and push the United States out of this relationship. Because if Israel wants to be the dominant power, the United States is the governor. The United States is the ring around Israel's neck, preventing it from taking over Lebanon, from moving all the way from the Nile. taking over huge swaths of land as the part of the Greater Israel Project. So the United States needs to be marginalized. So Iran's answer in all of this, it says if the United States hits its power infrastructure, then lights out. Iran will completely close the Strait of Hormuz, retaliate against the United States, linked energy, infrastructure, IT, desalinization, all of it, infrastructure across the region. Legitimate targets, Microsoft, Amazon, Palantir-based data centers. So that is not de-escalation. That is the architecture of a much wider war that we're seeing right now. And notice the contradiction here, staring everybody in the face. We are constantly told that Iran is degraded, crippled, cornered, collapsing, outmatched. Okay. We're told that the skies are controlled. We heard that from President Trump and Pete Hegseth. The skies above Iran are totally controlled. Launchers are gone. That victory is basically already achieved. And yet, we have reports today that Tehran fired long-range ballistic missiles towards the joint U.S. base on Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. Also, Iranian strikes near Israel's Dimona nuclear facilities. In other words, even after weeks of bombardment, Iran still retains the capacity to strike, to threaten sea lanes, to rattle energy markets, force the world to now react to this. That matters because one of the oldest tricks in war is propaganda. It's to tell the public that the enemy is weak. It's almost finished. Down to their last breath. Sound familiar? Like Ukraine? Ukrainian war? We were hearing this about Russia. Remember, they were telling us in 2022, the Daily Mail, all these, propaganda news media were telling us that Russia is destroyed, that Putin's ballistic missiles are running out. Okay. And then just the other day, on early March of this year, we already heard within the first few days, the Telegraph ran the same headline that Iran was running out of the same missiles. Same script, different enemy. By the way, Moon of Alabama, great publication, compiled the rolling sequence of claims that 50%, 60%, 75%, even 80% of Iran's launchers had supposedly been destroyed. Okay. But then other reporting points out that the arsenal remained more resilient than advertised, and that a lot of these ballistic missiles are being launched from pads underground where we don't even know where they are. And then you have right alongside these headlines, you had Reuters, AP, still reporting that Iran was striking all sorts of targets, striking all sorts of positions inside of Israel and beyond. So this is how modern war messaging works. You're fed like optimism, inevitability, Iran's degraded. And you get all these simplified talking points so you won't ask any harder questions, like if the enemy is actually degraded or not. And you're not supposed to ask harder questions. If the enemy is actually finished, why does the war keep happening? Why does the war keep expanding? If victory is so close, why do the threats keep getting bigger? If the operation is under control, why are thousands of Marines being deployed to the region? Why is gas prices continue to explode? Why is the whole region being dragged towards an economic shock? That's why this is a much bigger story than Iran. The war is not the whole story. It's just one small gear in a much larger machine. And I've been really trying to challenge myself to see these things in a larger capacity lately. I think it's very easy for us to focus on a narrow part of the story. It's just Iran. It's just Israel. No, it's not. It's a much bigger story. And then once you understand that this has been planned for decades, it really hits you in a different way. Because what happens every time there's a major crisis, the answer is always the same thing. The public is told to accept more control in exchange for your safety, more surveillance in exchange for, it's convenient, right? More dependence in exchange for, more dependence really, but in exchange for some sort of stability. That's really what we see. Man, it's super windy today here in the mountains of Colorado. As you can see, the wind blowing like crazy, so I apologize here. So you get this centralized system in exchange. You get this more centralized systems in exchange for resilience. That's the idea. And the systems they're building are not temporary systems. They are permanent. They are durable systems. I was watching a documentary the other night about D.B. Cooper. I don't know how many of you know the story of D.B. Cooper, famous story from the 70s, of course, the guy who hijacked an aircraft, jumped out, $200,000. And at the time, of course, you just walk through any airport. You just walk up, got a ticket, hopped on a plane. Think how different we are in a world post 9/11, how the amount of security we now have because of the threat of like a shoe bomber. Okay, this is what we're giving up. They are systems designed to manage movement, manage money, manage speech, energy, access, and ultimately our behavior. To see Claudia Sheinbaum over the past 2 days in Mexico announcing, only digital payments now for transportation. A number of you're not allowed to use cash anymore for Mexico for certain transactions. No more. It's all digital because it's all about control. So whether you call it a controlled collapse, a managed transition, or emergency governance, emergency. It's an emergency. We need to take away your rights because we're in a civil war. Iran sleeper cells being activated in the United States. So it's the same point, right? Freedoms are weakened while new forms of dependency are introduced now as the solution. It's more convenient for you. And you can already see this happening in real time because the shockwaves from the war are changing ordinary life outside of what's happening in the Middle East. We have reporting that the crisis is already hitting Asia, Southeast Asia, very hard because of its dependence on imported energy moving through the Strait of Hormuz. Thailand has already activated emergency measures. They're ramping up coal and hydropower, and they're telling people to stay home. Government offices are trying to conserve energy. The Philippines shifted their government offices to a 4-day work week. Stay home. We don't want you because we can't have you on the roads because we don't have enough energy. We don't have gas, petrol. Pakistan has shut schools for 2 weeks, cutting fuel allocations for government vehicles. This is already what happens when a collapse looks like in the early phase. It's not always bombs falling outside of your window, not always some apocalyptic movie scene. Sometimes it looks like rationing. Sometimes it looks like school closures. Sometimes it looks like work schedules are being altered slightly. 4-day a work week. We don't want you in offices anymore. We don't want you going to the city. We want to control your movement because your movement is now being reduced. Your choices are narrowed. You have to identify within this certain band of how you're going to live your life. So you got movement being reduced, you got choices narrowed, you got consumption is now being monitored. And then you got the whole population slowly trained to adapt. Like we're just going to live in this emergency living now. And yes, this is why COVID matters so much in this conversation. Not because every single claim floating around the internet was true, but because COVID showed governments and institutions what they can get away with their populations and what their populations will tolerate under like sustained fear. Think about it. We just passed the 6th anniversary of March 11th, 2020. The WHO formally characterizing COVID-19 as a global pandemic. It's hard to believe. March 11th, 2020. You think about the broad social restrictions around the world. And I mean, people in China were already being required at the time to scan QR codes at office buildings, malls, residential compounds just to get in and out, metro systems, handing over travel, health data so people could track everything in China moving through their daily life. That's exactly what we saw. That was a massive live test of compliance, digital gatekeeping, centralized messaging, state corporate coordination. So when people say COVID was a trial run, the strongest version of that argument is not fake, not mystical. It's practical. In fact, it was true. It proved how quickly we can become sheep. It proved how quickly extraordinary controls can become ordinary. Now look at the money system. I mean, China expanding the digital yuan by authorizing 12 more banks now to handle it, on top of the 10 already approved. Japan settling oil transactions now outside of the US petrodollar. Beijing sees the digital yuan not just as a domestic payment tool, but as part of a broader cross-border monetary infrastructure strategy outside of the dollar system. In Europe, look what's already happening in Europe. Reports that European Parliament now giving major backing to the digital euro, both online and offline. And the ECB says the project is moving forward with a possible target of 2029 if this legislation passes later this year. So in plain English, major power centers already actively building programmable digital money infrastructure. You know, that doesn't prove every nightmare scenario, but it absolutely proves that the rails are already being laid for a world in which access to public money becomes more digitized, more centralized, and of course, potentially more conditional, and we're already seeing this with the rollout of 15-minute cities across England and other areas. And then there's the mobility and energy piece of the story. This piece is obviously maybe more contested because you're seeing some pullback in certain areas, but the pressure is real. California, their rules still require automakers to sell a rising number of electric vehicles, and they have to meet extremely strict electric vehicle numbers. They have to have that obviously increasingly strict tailpipe emissions limits, even as Congress has moved to strip California of the authority to ban new gas-powered cars after 2035. So yeah, there's still this political resistance. It's not a straight line, but hey, close the Strait of Hormuz, drive gas prices through the roof, and then push us all to buying electric vehicles. Basically, the direction of elite policy pressure for years has been towards electrification, central management of energy demand, reduced dependence on internal combustion engines, even if voters and industry keep fighting it, even if people aren't buying it, even if you give all these government incentives, like what Ford had to deal with, all of these government incentives on their trucks, and people just didn't want to buy them. Now add a major Middle East war on top of it, you disrupt all these oil flows, and the governments are already ordering conservation measures across Southeast Asia. How soon until that happens in the United States? Can you see a pattern here? Crisis after crisis gets used to push populations towards systems that are easier to meter, to regulate, to track, to remotely manage. So when I say the controlled collapse is already here, I don't mean that tomorrow morning everyone wakes up inside some sort of science fiction prison. I mean, the transition is already underway. War destabilizes. It's the largest destabilization mechanism that we have, war. Energy shocks destabilize prices. Then price shocks justify intervention. You're already seeing this with the release of our strategic petroleum reserves. You're already seeing Scott Bensent, you're already seeing the Treasury on the United States side easing sanctions, which is ridiculous, on Iran, oil sanctions on Iran, in a war that we are with them in order to ease global market panic. It's crazy what world we're living in right now. So intervention normalizes digital controls. Digital controls merge with finance, identity, movement, communications, and eventually biology. Just look what's happening at the airports right now with the TSA and all the craziness at US airports. Move to a digital system so we can move you through the airport more quickly, right? Because we just don't have the manpower right now because we're in this chaos. So just go digital, we'll move you through more quickly, we'll scan your face, your eyes, your retina, everything. And all the way, this propaganda never changes. The enemy is always irrational. The media always says the missiles are almost gone. They've completely dried up. Iran doesn't have ballistic missiles anymore. And then you've got these emergency powers that are always temporary. We just need to do this temporarily while we make it through. Like President Trump said, it will have some short-term pain, right? That's what Fox News is parroting, right? We'll have short-term pain for long-term gain. That's what they've been telling us. But the surveillance state will be there. The control grid that Catherine Austin Fitts has been warning about is here, and it's growing. The monetary control system is already in place. All of these pieces are being rolled out, and they're doing it under this guise of it's complex. Everything that's happening in the Middle East, it's so complex. You have all these different power players. You have Israel's problems, of course. You have what's happening with Hezbollah and the Houthis, what's happening in southern Lebanon, what's happening in Syria, what's happening with this relationship between Russia and China and Iran. No, it's not complicated at all. It's all about control. It's all about control. So they can try to make you believe that it's complex, but it's really simple. And it's all about control. That's it. So thank you guys for subscribing. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but I've been really thinking a lot about this over the past few days as they try to spin this story, spin this yarn, and tell you that this is so complex. Really, it's about taking away our freedoms. As we all have to sort of sit here, I hope we'll go quietly, just like in COVID-19, like a bunch of sheep. But we knew the trial run was COVID. And is this the big rollout? It would seem to be. It would seem to be that this is the big rollout of their 2030 agenda. So again, thanks for subscribing. Thanks for listening to me. And thanks for letting me get some of this off my chest today.